Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Baseball Podcast. It is me, Joey P. Joe Pisapia. With me, of course, is the Welsh, and it's you. And today, it's about the prospects. That's right. Top 10 prospects on the rise and the top 10 Dynasty Buys. The guys whose value might be a little bit lower than it should be, and it's a time to make a deal in this offseason before we kick off 2023. But before we get to those names, we actually have a little baseball business that just happened less than an hour ago. Jeff Passan has a trade, the Boston Red Sox acquiring shortstop Adalberto Mondesi from the Kansas City Royals, and the deal is done. So Trevor Story out, Mondesi in. Welsh, your thoughts?
I'm a little surprised overall. I mean, I'm not surprised that they traded him. The team had kind of talked about like their lack of hope and what he was going to really be able to do with the team, like overall. So I'm not surprised about it. I am surprised about the return and what ended up being a part of this trade because they got nothing. As far as I can see in this report, they got this kid, Josh Taylor, a reliever, and the Royals are giving up Mondesi and a player to be named later. So I assume the Boston Red Sox are going to be taking on the entirety of that contract.
Probably.
And I even took a look at roster resource that, because another thing was interesting was Kike Hernandez. And this actually is going to affect you, Joe, a little bit, because Kike Hernandez was the starting shortstop. And the second baseman was Christian Arroyo. Current roster resource looks like the adjustment is that Enrique and Kike Hernandez is going to move to second, and Mondesi is going to take over that shortstop spot, though he had played third and stuff. So it's a fascinating move by a team that's decimated by big talent, but Mondesi is a weird get and seems like a really weird fit in Boston.
Well, I will quote a good friend of ours, Frank Stanfo, who I think has the best tweet that I've seen so far about this. Trevor Story gets hurt. Red Sox trade for Adalberto Mondesi, who's always hurt. So, I mean, he is. I mean, how much are you going to give up for him, too? 15 games last year, 35 games in 21. Obviously, COVID season, we'll throw that one out, but 102 games. I mean, the most games he ever plays 102 games. I understand in Broto leagues, he steals a ton of bases, and I get that. But I mean, the guy's got to stay on the field. He's got so much swing and miss. He has never been one of my guys on this show. Everybody knows that. I have railed against him because he's always been too high in terms of ADP. And this will drive that again. I would tell everybody, go take some really late shares in those deeper leagues of guys like Christian Arroyo, because they're going to get plenty of at-bats, because Mondesi is, and not that Kike Hernandez necessarily is a guy you want there, every single day at this point too in his career.
I don't disagree, but I'm still in this space with Mondesi where it's like he's criminally low. Like I agree. Like he's always been too high. It's always been kind of a problem, but he's insane. He's post like 200, 250. Him being with Boston is going to move up the ADP. I'm not going to like it when it moves into the top, 200, inside the top 200. But with those stolen bases, I don't know how aggressive Boston's going to be. It looks like they're going to put him most likely towards the back end of a lineup. I mean, he maybe could hit two, but I doubt it. They're probably going to have Enrique and Yoshida and the top two, but then you got Devers, Turner, Verdugo. So he's anywhere from 6 to 7. It's not the most magnificent spot, but they might want to manufacture runs. So maybe they're going to have him run a little bit more than ever, but it doesn't change his health. So I don't know. I just think post 200, he's still a good value.
Yeah. Hey, look, I think post 200, but I think that is going to change because when you start playing for a high profile team, everybody always wants to think on the bright side. That's what everybody always wants to do. And look, he's still very young. He's still south of 28
years old. Yeah.
Yeah, 27 right now. Yeah. So, look, we'll see what happens, but certainly that's a big move. That being said, let's talk about some other guys that are moving up the charts for the Welsh when it comes to the prospects. He's, of course, the host of Prospect One. If you haven't listened to that show, you should. He knows a thing or two about prospects, also covers the Arizona Fall League, which is very exciting stuff, and always out there in spring training, seeing these guys with his own eyeballs. That's why I always like talking about prospects with the Welsh. Now, before we get to the names, too, just a quick thing. MLB Draft Simulator, it's here. It's ready for you. Go get your mock draft on fantasypros.com/draft wizard. The multi-user drafts are coming. Winter is coming. It's all coming. Baseball's coming. But right now, the draft simulator is open. 15 minutes. You run a draft. You can run probably 3 in that time. I'm just banging out drafts every day. And I'm teaching myself a few things about the value so far, at least the early value in 2023. So go do the same. fantasypros.com/draft wizard. Try the draft simulator today if you haven't. And if you do already, it's a great tool. Go make some more mocks. All right, Welsh, let's start with number 10 on your list. And because Welsh and I are overachievers, not only have we given you lists, but we've given you kind of little groupings and tiers for certain reasons, because that's the way we are. And the first guy on your list is incredibly young. He is just 17 years old. And his name is Yasser Mercedes. So let's talk about Mercedes here from the Minnesota Twins, the outfielder.
So this tier I'm calling the next big thing. These are three guys I'm going to give you. They're kind of like the next big jump ups. We've got different tiers of prospects that we're going to talk about in general. And even I had asked Joe when we were starting this up, I was like, well, how do you want to approach this? Do you want to approach this overall prospects? Do you want to go more, redraft based? So the next big thing are going to be bigger looks, guys that aren't this year. And like you said, Yasser Mercedes is the youngest and furthest away. I dare I say this because I'm worried about saying this statement, but on my show this week, Prospect One, we had this listener question. Someone was like, who's the next Jackson Chourio? The proper answer is nobody. Nobody's the next Jackson Chourio because it was uniquely weird in what he did. He was maybe going to play rookie level ball, and then he jumped all the way to A ball and from extended spring training. Yasser Mercedes was the closest I could give to that answer for anybody. What a phenomenal year with the Minnesota Twins outfielder, had a 3.45 slash, so 300 average, 400 OBP, 500 slug last year. Only 4 homers, but stole 30 bases in the Dominican Summer League as a 17-year-old. Also impressive, had a sub 17% K rate. And like the strikeout rates are something I really care about in like lower levels. Like they could have like 20% walk rates, but what does that strikeout rate look like? Pretty low. Also put up an over 200 ISO, a measure for where power is. In the majors, 200 plus ISO guys are high end. Now, not to say this is going to be a high end power guy, but 200 ISO is a good marker. Also, what I love, a 9.3 speed rating on Fangraphs. And that is probably going to equate to the top percents of the league. So this is a bigger physical guy with a great swing, put some good hard hit on there, 3.45 slash, can run, doesn't strike out. Mm-hmm. And this is a full 5-tool player that's going to come over and play stateside. That's going to be the really big transition. But meets a lot of qualifications for me as far as these, because I think this is the biggest like crazy thing for Dynasty people to deal with is what do you do with 17 and 16 and 18-year-old kids that come in and sign internationally or play in the Dominican Summer League? This is a guy that is in my top 100 for Dynasty. I think he's a buy right now. And even if you sell him off later, if he pops anything like he did in the Dominican Summer League, he's going to move into top 50s for overall for Dynasty. That's where we could go with Yasser Mercedes.
We'll see how he makes the transition. I told you, he reminds me of a very young Yoenis Cespedes when I watch him because you see the frame. And if that frame fills out, this could be a kid who has a lot of power at some point. Next guy on the list is the first pick of the Seattle Mariners, number 12 overall, Harry Ford, the young catcher here. Ford, an interesting one to me. I understand you're not always looking for guys with small offensive catcher. There's some hit and miss here when I look at tape on him. But when you look at Harry Ford, what are you seeing here as a prospect on the rise? Again, the next big thing grouping.
Well, there's a couple interesting things with him. So I was at like his pro debut, and he's got really great bat speed. Physically didn't quite look like a catcher when I saw him. I saw him in the next spring, and I kind of noted to him.
I would say,
yeah, he was a little bit smaller. Well, here's what's funny about that. I noted to him in the next spring after rookie ball that he looked like he lost weight, and he was almost like he's like, oh, really? And I'm like, not a bad way. I'm like, you lost weight, like it looked like summer heat in Arizona and stuff like that. Well, I was with Eric Cross and Chris Clegg, our friends over at Fantrax and Pitcher List now, during the Arizona Fall League. And I'm in a line. I'm sorry, I'm giving you this anecdotal thing. I'm in a line to go get a drink at Peoria Sports Complex. And they start to walk up. Over here to my right walks Harry Ford because their training facility is there. And he is jacked, man. I'm telling you, jacked. Like probably 20 plus pounds of muscle added. And I nudged Cross and Clegg and I go, look, Harry Ford. And we all were enamored and total weirdos too, because we're like, oh, this guy looks great. But he gained like a lot of physical muscle. And I think that's important because that's coming off of a year where he had 11 homers and stole 23 bases as a catcher. As a catcher, he did that.
Right.
400 at bats, he did it. This was all in A ball. He increased his walk percentage from 13 to 17% as well, and had 88 walks this past year. One of only 2 teenagers to have 88 walks in the minors, and he ranked 22 overall. I mean, you take the physical body changes. He's got a big, like power bat speed swing that is now translating into homers. There's speed in there, and there has always been talk that maybe he's not going to be a catcher long term. He could play out of position.
That was my next question too. Is I wonder if he's a guy that gets moved off a catcher, but we shall see.
And if he is, he's even more valuable. He's even more valuable if he is, I think, because it's more theoretical at bats if you do. And this is a guy that Dalton he's different from Dalton Varsho. I think he's a more aggressive base stealer. He can, and maybe not quite as big of power, but I think the batting average can stay higher, and he is going to be the next big Mariner to pop.
All right. Certainly the Mariners are doing a pretty good job of scouting the last few years for the most part. Evan Carter, outfielder from Texas, the last guy in the next big thing grouping. He is number 7 overall on this list of the prospects on the rise. Let's talk about Carter, the Texas Rangers, too. Young outfielder here, 6'4", 190, pretty big kid. A little bit of a long swing, but certainly, again, when you look at these young guys, too, you hope that as they move up the ladder, that they continue to make a contact and continue to drive the baseball.
Yeah, I have a memory last spring. I was sitting over on like the far backfield here in Surprise, and they have like the low A and double A, and guys will train, and no one's back there. It's just me. I'm the only person back there. And it's Evan Carter and Aaron Zavala. And Aaron Zavala is a very popular prospect, a little bit further along at Oregon. And he actually just suffered an injury in the AFL. And Evan Carter and him were out there doing some BP, this weird BP session they were doing on the side. And Evan Carter was just running ropes over him as far as bat speed goes. He is a little bit more upright and longer swing, but kind of like Harry Ford, the power speed combo, 12 homers, 28 stolen bases, and he just barely missed being a 3-4-5 slash guy. And I would also note, he got a touch of double A this past year. He had suffered some injuries the previous year that kind of slowed his pace a little bit. He also increased his home run to fly ball ratio. He's just a great 5-tool player. The Rangers covet him. I got a source that like he's not a tradable asset. Like guys like in the higher end of the Jack Gliders are more accessible than a guy like Evan Carter is. He's a guy that this team fully believes in. I believe that it's kind of a cheap comp, and I apologize for doing it, but there is a Kyle Tucker-ness to him. Also, maybe even physically, like he hasn't grown in. I don't know if he's going to physically grow into this big buff guy, but he's kind of got that taller, skinnier, lengthier approach. And there is 2020 upside for him. And Evan Carter statistically is up there, and some of the more astute dynasty peoples will have him up there, but he's one of those guys that is really going to pop. And if he has another year like he just did, you're going to be looking at him as a top 10 overall fantasy prospect.
All right, the next group you have for us, this tier, when it comes to the prospects on the rise, is the major risers, the guys who have taken, I guess, a big leap year over year for you that I think are going up the boards here. Who is first on that list for you?
Well, we're going to talk about a pitcher, and I've talked about him if you followed me in the offseason. There's not a lot of pitchers on this list. We're only going to do 2 total. In the major risers, this is the only one, and you should probably know where I'm going if you have listened. It is Arizona Diamondbacks' Brandon Pfaadt, not Fat. We thought it was Fat for a little bit, but no, I'm just Pfaadt. Joe, I'm not fat. I'm just a little.
Well, and it's and in all fairness too, it's the PF spelling. So
yeah, he is PFAADT. It's a very anxiety driven name, so beware. But Brandon Pfaadt, he led the minors in strikeouts with 218, which is absurd. Also, take the guys that are like high strikeout guys. A guy like Dylan Cease. Dylan Cease has some walk issues that are out there. Brandon Pfaadt does not. He had an under 5% walk percentage, which gave him the 4th best K- walk percentage. It's actually a really good stat to look for in minor league pitchers. You take the K percentage and then you minus whatever the walk is, and you can kind of see like a true strikeout percentage on like where his walks are going to affect. Also maybe a whip thing you can take a look at. And he was 4th best in all of the minors, which I thought was phenomenal. And that was 26.9%. Also to 16.5 swinging strike percentage. And this is a really cool one. This is very Zach Gallen-esque. You go and look, and his ERA is not spectacular. His ERA is like, high 3s, I think it is, maybe even 4s. Well, in Double A this year, where he spent a lot of his time, he had a 4.5 ERA in Double A. He goes to Triple A and pitches in the PCL. PCL is not a friendly environment. Not many people come out of that. Even Dre Jameson and Ryan Nelson, guys that struggle in the PCL and come up to the majors. Like, you can look at PCL numbers, and you can just translate back and be like, oh, we're going to get through this. Well, Brandon Pfaadt, in PCL in 10 starts had a 2.61 ERA in the PCL. That's like what Gallen did when he was out here. So it's a 4-pitch arsenal, lots of strikes he throws, big strikeout option, and he might be a guy that gets in the rotation this year. Brandon Pfaadt has moved in as a top 10 overall pitching prospect on my list.
Organizational player and pitcher of the year, by the way, for that team, which is
good, man.
Considering that's Corbin Carroll is in that spot there. Also with Pfaadt, the one thing too, I mean, real drop and drive when you watch him pitch, obviously. The one thing though he's got to get rid of is that little tap he does with his glove in between pitches, like in his windup. So he'll come back over the top, and then he comes back down there and he separates and it comes back together with the glove. That can be something where you start to tip your pitches if you do that on certain pitches. that is something that I watched when watching film of him that I went, ooh, that's something you got to clean up, because when we get to the big leagues, they're going to start to figure that out a little bit.
To your point, he had a home run problem, and that is one of his things that he's going to have to cure up. He's got a home run issue that he gave up a decent amount of homers in the minors, and part of it is just pounding the zone and getting strikeouts. It's very like, I want to say it was like early Nola-esque or something like that. There's a couple of those guys that had big home run issues, but I totally agree. There are things that need to be cleaned up. But he is totally under the radar.
He could even be a high leverage reliever someday. Like if things don't work out, like he's got that kind of real attacking of the strike zone, very low in the finish of his windup too, something you don't see very often here. All right, let's get to the next guy on your list. Who is it here for for the major risers here? Who do you have?
So we're going over to the Baltimore Orioles, who their system, it's very like Diamondback-esque, where it's like Diamondbacks were like Jordan Lawler and Drew Jones. Oh my God, Corbin Carroll. The Orioles are the same thing. I mean, they've got, in the top end, they've got Gunnar Henderson and Grayson Rodriguez. Colton Cowser is a very popular guy, but Connor Norby took a insane rise this year from a lot of people, and myself included, someone I just did not pay enough attention to in season. He hit 29 homers with 16 stolen bases in the minor leagues this past year. He did a Matt Mervis where he decreased his strikeout percentage at 3 different levels, and he got up to AAA. So high AA, AAA, he decreased his strikeout percentage, which is such an important marker for the type of quality hitter you're going to have. And then in that, he increased his batting average and his ISO at every single level as well. So this is a middle infield. I will personally tell you, I think with the level of where he's at right now, he might be someone you even consider looking to trade, because in the prospect world, if you're paying attention, he is one of the hottest pieces. I do a Prospect 1 ADP draft where we get industry people. We draft tons of them so we can create an ADP of prospects, which does not exist out there. And Norby was one of those players that went like inside the top like 25 in 2 or 3 of the 5 drafts that I did. So that's one of those markers to tell you that Norby's value, as far as people that are paying attention, is sky high. I'm definitely a buyer. I don't know if I'm a buyer as far as like top 10 or 15 overall, but the home.
I don't know about that, but I'm a buyer markers, too. I like.
Well, the decreased strikeout percentage power. Is so good. Yeah.
Well, he's also, the lower half is good in the swing too, and that's something where you always look at like, can this guy have a lot of power there? So he's a strong kid, but I like the power to the opposite field that he's flashed too. That's something when you watch the tape on him, like that's something that I always feel if the guy can do that, that means he's a pretty good hitter at his core. And some guys are just get very pull happy, especially young guys. They want to just try to, hit every ball at the ballpark, stuff like that. I like what I see out of him in that context. All right, give me another guy here. This guy actually used to be in the Mets system, but now he's a Chicago Cub, Pete Crow-Armstrong. Let's talk about him.
Yeah, Pete Crow. This is like, again, you see a lot of these like big counting stat players, and this is why there's big increases on them. Pete Crow-Armstrong, 16 homers, 32 stolen bases last year. And this is coming off of a season before where he missed almost the entirety of the year. He played a little bit early on. I have a very vivid memory because I'm a big fan of Pete Crow-Armstrong, where he was hitting like 400 over his first 4 or 5 games. And everyone's like, nah, it's just Pete Crow-Armstrong. Then he got hurt and people didn't know really how to value him. And he came out and he had a phenomenal season. He had 16 homers, 32 stolen bases, a .312 batting average, and a .520 slug, which I thought was incredibly impressive. Big power numbers he can run. Also, 48 extra bases over 107 games he played. So that's including his homers. 10 of those were triples. I mean, doubles, triples. This is the epitome of what 5-tool players look like. They run, they hit for power, there's good batting average. This is who Pete Crow-Armstrong is right now, and he's moving in a great direction that I just don't, again, I don't know if people have caught up to like where he is, his value. He, like Evan Carter, these are 2 guys with repeated early season stuff this year are going to move into like top 10 overall prospects, because you're going to have like Gunnar and Corbin Carroll and Miguel Vargas that are going to graduate. These are guys that could jump into those spots if they continue.
Yeah. And great point too about the 5 tools. And look, the Cubs are, finally signing some guys. I think the fan base is starting to feel, good again about, starting to turn the page into the next phase of what the Chicago Cubs are going to be. And he could certainly be a big piece of this team. Next guy on this list from a major riser is a first baseman in Tampa Bay. Let's talk about him.
So this might be one of the biggest risers of all, like end of season into this year, as far as where different people have him valuing. At this point, he's a no doubt top 15 prospect. He ended up having, I believe, a top 10 ADP in my Prospect 1 ADPs, and it's Kyle Manzardo, first baseman with the Tampa Bay Rays, who, by the way, fun note, I actually might be sitting with in a week.
Well, there you go.
I might be around Kyle Manzardo. Kyle Manzardo was one of only 22 or younger hitters in all of minor leagues to have a 600 slug at 617. You want to know who the other guy was?
Who?
Corbin Carroll. No big deal. Corbin Carroll was the other one.
There you go.
So 600
slug, too small to hit home runs.
Too small.
That's going to be our MO, I feel like, this year. We're going to be.
That's going to 100% be my MO. Dude, it's been only the guy who's had 200 ISO at every single level. He's on this list across the board power. Him and now there are other guys that are on this list, but they're like Dominican Summer League complex level guys. So these are the only two that are 22 or younger. There's actually like two other guys that show up in the 600s that are like 24 years old, but these are 22 or younger. Corbin Carroll and Kyle Manzardo are on that list. He was also one of only 3 full season guys to have an OPS over 1,000. Vaughn Brown is one of them. Can you name the other guy?
Nope.
Corbin Carroll again. Only one of 3 full season players. I'm making this about Corbin Carroll.
Corbin Carroll on principle.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to set you up. But yeah, Corbin Carroll, but also to point out, like if you really like Corbin Carroll, like Kyle Manzardo in that area, high slug. He has a beautiful swing, gets under it, high launch angle, big.
I wouldn't say violent swing, but like a just raw power. Like he gets through the zone very quickly there.
And he's got really hard the hit. It's like it's essentially like the hard hit metric on RotoWire. If you go and check it out, their batted ball data, it's on the higher end. It's
he's an exit velo guy. You don't need the numbers to tell you that. You just watch it and you can tell 100%. The ball flies off the bat there when he makes contact too. And he's a lefty who can hit lefties too, which I like. You don't see that.
Take that all day long. Yeah. So Kyle Manzardo, one of those guys whose value has skyrocketed. There's always a potential he could come up this year, but it is the Rays, so we question that. But Kyle Manzardo, definitely one of the biggest risers.
All right, we got 3 more guys to prospect talk about here, and then we'll get to the top 10 dynasty buys. But there's 3 guys that Welsh thinks have the potential to break camp with their respective teams. Let's start with the first one on your list. Who is it?
Yeah, this is camp breaker, outfielder with the Chicago White Sox, Oscar Colas. So much so, why do we say this? Because the team is saying it. That's the cool thing about these 3 prospects is the
White Sox have been aggressive in the past, so we should believe them when it comes to prospects. They are not an organization that holds them back.
And you know this like weird thing that baseball's got now where obviously it's not weird to get extra compensation, but it's weird that like the guys have to be on like top 100 lists and stuff like that to qualify. Oscar Colas is that. So there's an extra added advantage for especially a more advanced player, Cuban player who, played a lot, actually had a little bit of a break between this last year. But for him to come out, they've got an opportunity for Colas to compete with Gunnar Henderson for Rookie of the Year, which would enable them to acquire an extra pick. So there's an extra added reason. But Colas also 23 homers, 3 stolen bases, hit 314 this past year, just under 900 OPS, had 151 hits, which is phenomenal. As far as like the walk percentage, strikeout percentage, it's nothing completely eye-raising, but this is a big impact power bat that the White Sox are going to give him the opportunity to break camp. He's got to break apart. He's got to fall apart for him to not take this job. And this team has always really propped up Cuban players in a really great way. Eloy Jimenez, obviously Abreu. Luis Robert. Yeah, exactly. So this is, I'm not sure if Eloy actually is Cuban now that I'm thinking about it, but I know Luis Robert is. But they've always done a really good job at propping these guys and giving them an opportunity. And they're doing that here. Big impactful bat that if he's hitting somewhere near Robert and Eloy, I think there's just really, really good offensive potential. So Oscar Colas, way better, I think, than perception has been given, because they've swung and missed on like Yoelqui Cespedes. Speaking of, Cespedes' brother was kind of a big miss by them, and I think these guys kind of get lumped in. Oscar Colas is not Yoelqui.
No, and he's also a guy that, like, as he moved up the ladder from high A to double A to triple A, it's pretty much the same guy. He's at 300. It's got a mid 3, at least, OBP, and the slugging is there. So
that's a great point. I didn't even bring up 300 at every single level he pushed this year. Obviously,
I know it was only a couple games at AAA. By the end of the year, it was only 7. But the point is, when you go through the system, whenever you're jumping tiers, that quickly, it means that, look, this guy is just far beyond that tier. So you just continue to challenge him until you find a challenge. So like if he ended up starting the year in AAA, it wouldn't shock me. If you gave him 100 bats in AAA, it wouldn't shock me. But I'm with you. That's a guy that you could certainly look for. The next guy too, Andrew Painter. This is to me a linchpin guy of whether or not the Phillies can continue to hang in the East, because Painter seems to be like that next big pitching prospect guy. Everybody loves him, rightfully so. I understand why, but they're going to need him because with Harper out, this team is going to have to do things a little differently. I don't care. You bring in Trey Turner. It's a great addition. It's asking a lot for Schwarber to do exactly what he did last year. But this was a guy, another one who last year started at A, then went to high A and then double A. And you look at the combined numbers over 100 innings there, 155 Ks. I mean, the guy was just dominant.
Yeah, and he's a big physical presence too. And the thing to note about him is the team has openly said they are open to him breaking camp. And this is wild because this is a 19-year-old pitcher. We don't see this very often. And I really kind of shy away sometimes from like prospect pitchers and redraft and stuff like that. But if they are telling themselves, listen, we don't want to waste these innings. We don't want to waste this arm. He got 100 innings last time. We can push him to 150 on a full season. That helps us now when we need it. It's big. The guy had a 1.5 ERA in 20 starts last year, 155 strikeouts over 103 innings. He has a big fastball. He's 6'7", throws a nasty curve up there. I mean, there is a good 3-4 pitch arsenal. I mean, there are 4 pitches that are 55 rated plus with a fastball in the 60s. So this is in many circles, and this is the weird thing that's happened as well, Joe, is like Grayson Rodriguez was seen as the number 1 overall pitching prospect in baseball. Andrew Painter has made that not a consensus whatsoever. There are quite a few big prospect rankers, especially in the fantasy space, that have Andrew Painter as number 1, and even some that don't even fully dabble fantasy, like Jeff Ponce, who's now Baseball America, that's his number 1 pitching prospect. So Andrew Painter's no joke, and he may break camp with the team, which would be a wild testament to how incredible this guy is.
All right. Now, number 1 on your list, you have Jordan Walker, outfielder for the St. Louis Cardinals. Now, we've been burned a lot with the Cardinals outfielders over the years. The Grichuks, Piscottis, the Harrison Baders. I mean, we can just kind of go on and on and on. I mean, Dylan Carlson, maybe he's in that mix too. I don't know. Jordan Walker is a big boy, 6'5". He reminds me a little bit of Derek Bell. Remember Derek Bell back in the day? He used to play for the Blue Jays. He has a little bit of berries for that. Like in terms of like big, strong guy, can hit the country mile, kind of dude. And Derek Bell was a good player for a while. Like that was the comp that came to mind when I watched this guy for the first time. But what do you think his chances are? And is he going to break this mold of Cardinals outfielders and disappoint us? Or is he going to be somebody who actually bucks that trend?
I think he's got a really good opportunity to buck that trend. I mean, I never say never, because you are right that there's a whole lot of like comp to these, but I'll tell you
it's a long list.
I'll tell you one thing though. Jordan Walker is very different from all of those other guys. You got a lot of like, maybe contact lower. I mean, like Tyler O'Neill, sub 6 foot, big muscle guy. Dylan Carlson, questionable EV.
Well, but the one guy they had in the organization that was different from the mold we're talking about, they got rid of. He ended up in Tampa. His name is Randy Rosarena, and the rest is history.
But you know what?
So hopefully I don't even know if
I'd kind of argue. I don't even know if Randy Rosarena is like who he was that different than even Dylan Carlson. Jordan Walker is different. This is game-changing power that none of those guys have had. Not one of those guys have had that type of game-changing power that Jordan Walker displays as they moved him from third base to the outfield. They practice in the AFL, him working in center field, so they're comfortable with his range. The guy stole more bases than he hit for power this past year, stole 22 bases. This is a 6'5", 6'6", 200 probably 35 pound outfielder who he gets a little over the top on balls. He did that in the AFL, but once he finds his stride, he can hit off speed. Batting average has never really been a big crazy issue. He hit 300 this past year. He hit 317 last year. The only place he never hit 300 was in A-ball, where he hit 296. So it's high batting average. And this is why we get into that, like, if there could be another Julio Rodriguez, who could it be? It feels like him, because Jordan Walker's got 30 home run potential. He's shown the ability to hit for over 300. He also stole 20 plus bases this past year, and he's moving into a position that the team does have to make room for him. They said they're going to give him an opportunity. The problem is as you mentioned, there's just a glut of players. Even Juan Yepez is currently.
I was gonna say Yepez playing DH. Like it's kind of a. We'll see. I mean, the injury could always change the calculus, obviously, right away in spring training, obviously. But we shall keep a close eye on that.
That's why he's number one.
That's why he should be, and he absolutely should be too. I mean, he is different. I just hope he is different in all of the ways than what we've seen in the past from all these guys we keep getting told about the outfield system of the St. Louis Cardinals, and it keeps disappointing us for a decade. All right, let's switch gears here to top 10 dynasty buys. And I've assembled this list here. Again, we've grouped it in certain ways and certain monikers for these people. The first one here is still young enough to improve. So number 10 on my list is Ketel Marte of the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, Marte has flashed upside power. He's flashed some speed. He's flashed average. He's dealt with some injuries. He was a player that I think we had lower expectations for, and then he exceeded our expectations. And then we've been trying to wait forever for those expectations to get back to where they were. And that is always a tough thing, I think, for a young player. Now, I know you see a ton of this player living out there in Arizona. But when you look at where we're at here with Marte, he's still a versatile player. He's still a guy that age-wise is still, not quite 30. So I still think there could be a prime around him. And as some of these younger players like Corbin Carrolls and Alec Thomases of the world start to surround this team a little bit, I think that could be a really good thing for his value. What do you think about Marte being a guy that, right now, if you look at the dynasty rankings for him too, he is 157 overall, and he's had some pretty good moments in the major leagues. I think he's being a little undervalued.
Yeah, and I mean, I buy it. Like, I personally, Ketel Marte has been one of my favorite players to watch over the years as a Diamondback fan. My problem is he just never really consistently knows who he is. He has he always puts up some absurd EV, 115 or something like that. The guy is a big physical guy. He can hit for huge power, but he struggles back and forth where he wants to hit things to the shoot. Last year, it was like him. He needed to be the guy. And I think he really struggled in that respect of not getting back to his game. He felt every run was on his back. So I believe he can, because this is a guy that hit over 300. He can hit 20 plus. The team never let him run, which I always thought was kind of crazy. But yeah, he's still young enough that I buy it. And maybe the Diamondbacks even move off of him at some point. But if they don't, and he can focus in on getting back to being that contact hitter, the table setters they have at the top make it very exciting, because there could be a lot of run potential, RBI potential. I think
he's got a better surrounding potentially. And you're right, too. There is a chance that if he does have a really good first half, he could find himself in a different situation, which could also be a very good one. Let's get to devalued prospects. There's a few of these guys. I want to start with Noelvi Marte of Cincinnati Reds now. This was the guy that everybody talked about when he was with the Seattle Mariners. And we got traded to the Reds. It's weird, Welsh, because I feel like his value kind of stagnated a little bit, and I don't know why. He's at 147 in the Dynasty ranks over at FantasyPros. And I think that's kind of selling him short. He's going to be 21 years old. The transition was fine. In some respects, the 30 games he played in the Cincinnati system were really good at high A. Now, look, we still have to wait for this guy to continue to move up. I know the AFL numbers were not good for him. That could also be the wear and tear of playing 115 games. That was the first time he played that many games. So that could also be it. Plus maybe just the wear and tear of being traded in season. But Marte is another one of these guys to me that it feels a little strange that his value took a hit at this stage. Maybe it's because he's moving from Seattle to Cincinnati, but this is a good ballpark for hitters. It's a lot to like here, and he's still young enough where I feel like we've been talking about him forever. And I feel like sometimes we get that, where you get a little fatigue of somebody, and then we sort of take him for granted. Do you think people are taking Marte for granted? Noelvi Marte, this is.
I think this is a tougher one, because I'm lower on Marte than, I don't know if it's even the consensus anymore. There are a couple things. There's this big thing last year where it was like his body was getting out of control, and it became this kind of almost a joke and blah, blah, blah. But then what you saw is like, he really seemed slower. He seemed, his bat speed, and I've seen him since he was 18 years old out here, and his bat speed seemed to kind of taper down a little bit. His pitch recognition doesn't look as good. He's absolutely not a runner anymore whatsoever, and he's a third base guy. What I will say is when he is on, he's on. He crushed this homer in the play-in game to the AFL championship, and he absolutely just crushed a homer in Peoria. He loves playing there, and he gets really amped up to play there. But like, he's just chasing more than ever. That I'm kind of down. I don't know if he's much more than a 250 hitter, though I do think he's a 30+ home run hitter in Cincinnati. That has not changed whatsoever. But his eye, as he's kind of moved up levels, has gotten down a little bit. What I do agree with is I think he's actually a really interesting buy right now.
That's what I mean. I think most people think like you. They have some concerns, and now all of a sudden this marketplace where he was a very coveted prospect a year ago has soured slightly, and that's the perfect time to buy a guy, especially on the cheap. And this is about buying low. It's not about buying high. Speaking of two guys, too, in the same organization, Riley Greene, Spencer Torkelson, two guys that we were hyping last year. Everybody was hyping. Everybody was excited to see, but unfortunately, it did not work out very well for these guys at the big league level last year. That being said, to me, this is another perfect time to buy them in Dynasty, because if you believe in the player, many players struggle in their first cup of coffee in the big leagues, and Torkelson had mighty struggles. My question to you is this: having covered both of those guys as long as you have, who do you think breaks through first? Is it Torkelson or is it Riley Greene?
Yeah, and I love both of these, by the way. I really love both of these, but I specifically love the Riley Greene one. I want to love Torkelson. He went to ASU. I watched him when he was in college, and
he was can't miss stuff.
Yeah, well, it was lightning, like light tower power. The only thing he ever had was his book was this like low breaking balls and low fastballs that he would chase. But otherwise, he was just destroying pitches and destroying mistakes. And that kind of went away. I still believe he can turn this around. I think it's too early with the power that he has and really the contact hitter that he was, at least in college. Like, to see the gap between Andrew Vaughn and him, it seems too big. But like Riley Greene, I really love, because Riley Greene, I've always believed, is a higher end contact hitter that, and I'm going to comp this, even though they're nothing alike, but it's like Paul Goldschmidt. Paul Goldschmidt doesn't try to hit homers. He's a doubles contact hitter who just has pure raw power. That's like Riley Greene. Riley Greene's not trying to hit homers. He's just a pure contact type of hitter that the ballpark dimensions may help as they come in. I know they went higher, but they might help him a bit more. I think he's going to hit better. It's about time. Run a little bit more. I think Riley Greene is, I like both of these, but Riley Greene specifically is my favorite of this buy.
Next one, by the way, Torkelson, just for S's and G's here, he was inside the top 100 Dynasty last year. Very much so. This year he's at 118. If that doesn't scream buy low, I mean, you're outside the top 100 overall players in Dynasty. If I told you that last year at this time, you would have said that's crazy for Torkelson.
Yeah, I agree. You just wish he was like a little bit more of a discount off of that crap year. You wish it was.
He was probably. I'd have to go back and look. I don't know if I could pull that up of where he was previous year, but I mean, dare I say he was top 75? Probably.
Oh, dude, no, he was probably top 50. He was probably top 50.
Now you're in 118. I mean, that's. I guess here's the thing: when some of these premium guys, when they struggle, this is your window, and it shuts awfully quick. And there's going to be a range of players here, not just kind of these young prospects too. We got some other guys to talk about too that I just think are being undervalued in the ranks, undervalued in the market here. The next one is Josh Jung, third baseman of Texas Rangers, who we were very high on last year. Unfortunately, injury kind of crushed his season, but he did come back, play 26 games at the end. I'm giving him a pass on last year. This team has gotten much better around him year over year. I like what Texas has at least tried to do. But this is a guy who's already got an everyday job lined up for him. And I think because he was a little, I wouldn't say under the radar prospect, he didn't get the same publicity a guy like Torkelson got or Riley Greene got for that matter. He was kind of in that next tier. I think this is the perfect opportunity to go pluck him off somebody else's roster. And you've got immediately in your dynasty league an everyday young player who could be at that corner for the next 5-6 years for the Texas Rangers if things go well. What are your thoughts on Josh Jung?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think a lot of people are like freaking out about the strikeout numbers, but like the guy didn't play for like a year, and he was sitting around rookie ball out here in the complex. I was at his debut. It was actually funny. Like he had friends in his return that there's a complex across from the field that they all stay in, and they had flags up there and stuff every time I have a picture of it. I should share it with everybody. They had these flags up for Jung when he was batting. Like, he's a really beloved guy, and he was out for so long. He went from complex up to AAA, played a handful of AAA games, and then the majors. And it's like, I'm going to give him a pass on maybe his like breaking ball recognition and overall like recognition's maybe a tiny bit behind after missing like close to a year and being in a sling and missing spring training. That a guy that wasn't his profile, I'm going to give him more of a pass. I kind of agree. I think he was stealing. He looked like faster than I'd ever seen him. The power is still there. He was built on being a contact hitter, not a big power hitter. So even if he's only a 20 home run guy, he might sneaky steal some bases and batting average might be up. And I'm not I think this is a really good one because I think people are worried about what they saw at the majors, which,
I mean, how can they? I mean, that's ridiculous. The guy didn't play all year, and then you throw him in at the end without. It's crazy. You're completely out of rhythm. We'll talk more about that kind of stuff with some players as we go on. So those are the group of devalued prospects: Torkelson, Greene, Marte, and Jung, that I think you could pluck out in dynasty leagues right now. Another grouping here: the undervalued in the market. I think with all the talk about the signing of Carlos Rodon to the Yankees, Nestor Cortez breaking out last year, Garrett Cole always getting a lot of publicity, I feel like Severino kind of gets lost in the shuffle here. Now, Luis Severino, a pitcher that has had some high watermarks for the Yankees, and then obviously some low moments as well. And then eventually we did get the Tommy John surgery now last year, coming off of that healthy. 102 innings, looked pretty darn good to me. 112 Ks, just 30 walks there. The strikeout percentage was pretty strong. The ERA was at 3.18. He doesn't have to be the top of the guy here in the rotation. He doesn't have to be the 2 or the 3 necessarily. So to me, this is a pitcher you're getting on the Yankees that still age-wise is less than 30. He is just 28 years old right now, but 29. To me, this is a player in Dynasty I want. He pitches on a great team. He's still young enough to hit his prime. He's past the Tommy John surgery, which is always that big thing in a pitcher's career, in a young pitcher's career. There's a lot to like here, and I think he is right now the perfect moment where you could buy him. What do you think about what I'm laying out here as a path to buying Severino, who's kind of lost in the shuffle of this rotation, I think a little bit underappreciated?
Yeah, I think I can get down with him as well. Like the strikeout numbers a little bit down, but ERA was really maintained this past year. He increased on his fastball from the prior season when he was returning from injury, which I think is great, and by a full mile per hour. Changeup, his pitch mix a little bit. Slider was used a little bit less, but I think this is also like the StatCast and Fangraphs, how they determine, because they show a cutter is thrown more. That's just, sometimes a cutter is just a faster velo slider. So it's like he still has his repertoire. He got his fastball back, maintained. His Sierra was still pretty good. Not like elite numbers or anything like that. But yeah, I'm in on Luis Severino. I completely agree. I think he's lost
ranked
in the
121 in our dynasty rankings right now.
I've got him higher in my own personal dynasty ranks. I've got him around 100. I think maybe like right inside the top 100 of my dynasty.
Me too. Opportunity is knocking, folks. It's also knocking for William Contreras, who got dealt this offseason to the Milwaukee Brewers. He is now going to play in a very homer-friendly environment for a guy who came off a year last year where he certainly flashed some power. This is the other brother of Wilson Contreras. 20 homers last year when he was in Atlanta Braves, played in 97 games. Catchers are tricky at times, but he is just 25 years old. And this is another player where, sometimes we get traded from a big time team like the Atlanta Braves. People get sour and they say, well, why are the Braves, but let's keep in mind the Braves are a factory for good young talent. They have been for, 30 years now, it feels like. So to me, this is a perfect opportunity where if there's any dip in the market, and it seems like, this is a player again, outside the top 125, I look at it and I say, there's opportunity here. I want this guy. I think he's going to be their catcher of the future. And I think that power that he flashed can only possibly improve in this environment. What do you think about my evaluation here of William Contreras?
Yeah, I agree. And I don't care even if he is a catcher, because he proved to be a great DH with the Braves when he was, and he could be a DH, and the NL provides that as extra. Yeah, I think
that's the big thing. It's changed the calculus so much with the DH in the National League that if you love him and you keep him a catcher, you can still get his bat in the lineup. Like, the value of this player is so different than it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, 20 homers in under 100 games this past year in Atlanta, and Milwaukee's pitching environment and hitting environment, I think, still works well. It's big stuff. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of William Contreras. To be honest with you, in dynasties, catchers are always kind of tough. Varsho, I think, is, towing different lines for a lot of people. You got Adley Rutschman's and stuff like that. But I think William Contreras is a sneaky later guy, because people I think have a hard time viewing, is he a DH, is he a catcher, what he did last year, flash in the pan type of stuff. I'm with William Contreras, and I think
I hope he's a DH who just keeps catcher eligibility every year. That's all I want.
And I think he can hit 25 homers. Steamer's got him at 22.
100%.
The Bat X has only got him at 18. I think he could push 25 this year. So
one of my favorite late catchers to draft right now is Contreras, without a doubt. All right, now the last three guys, this is the elite tier. They're still buy lows, I think, because for a myriad of reasons where there's an opportunity, there's a window here, because I think their stock is lower than it was last year. Their stock isn't low by any stretch of the means, but when it comes to elite players, there's sometimes a rare dip where you have the opportunity to pluck them off another roster and put them on yours. Those three guys that I have are Luis Robert, Wander Franco, Fernando Tatis Jr. All three of them are elite players. And you're going to say, oh, Joe, you're crazy. They're all, top. They are. But all of them year over year have a little bit of, shine off of them, just enough where I think there's opportunity to buy low. It's still going to cost you. You're still going to buy on them and it's going to cost you. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to give you, here's Noelvi Marte for Luis Robert. No, that's not going to happen.
No.
But Welsh, I think you would agree, all three of these guys getting into last year, there's no way anyone's even listening to a trade, I think, for any of these three players. Even Robert is still tenuous. I think with Tatis, he is definitely in play, and I think Wander Franco especially is too. What do you think of these three guys, and which one would you be overpaying just a little bit? Again, it's still a buy low compared to last year, but which one of these three guys between Tatis Jr., Franco, and Robert do you feel is the one that you would target in a trade right now?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I love this list. I love these guys. These are three guys that I couldn't agree more with you. Tatis is going to be the one, and this is the toughest one because, this is like a top 3 or 4 overall dynasty player. Maybe number 1 when he didn't have the suspension, but there is a suspension now. That suspension is looming for a lot of people, and people are going to be scared. They don't know what they got. They don't know what's going to return from him. He had 2 surgeries this offseason. He is accessible now. So I'm willing to pay the price to get Tatis and just curtail everything else. If I had to pick a number 2, though, I actually think it would be Luis Robert, because I think Luis Robert is really
24 close right now in the overall dynasty ranks, which I think is absurd.
And I think his value pushes back further. I'm in a dynasty mock right now, and Luis Robert and Wander Franco did not go in the first 2 rounds, and it's through 30 picks, and they both did not go in the first 2 rounds. And Luis Robert, I think, comes cheaper than what Wander Franco would be. The only fear with Wander Franco is, will we never materialize the skill set to the counting stats? I think he's going to be an elite hitter.
I think you do.
Luis Arise is a player that's a great contact hitter, but he doesn't get counting stats. I also believe Wander Franco
physical build too. Franco's a strong kid. I just think it's a matter of time for him, and he puts these things together. I remember people thought that Francisco Lindor would never hit for power. I remember those conversations. And I thought people were dead wrong about that too. And the many 30 home run seasons later, they said, oh, he's just a doubles hitter. I remember that narrative. It was just nonsense. You could see it was coming. He just had to get more confidence and a little bit better pitch recognition. And unfortunately for Franco, he plays in a ballpark that's not the best for that. But all three of these guys right now, again, they're all top 30 players, but they're not quite the stock they were a year ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's something you should pay attention to. This was a fun list. Welsh, always fun to do things here with you, talk baseball, talk about some of these young stars here being undervalued, the prospects, the dynasty buys. So hopefully this helped a lot of people here. Go make some trades and go do some drafts at fantasypros.com/draft-wizard. Go hit up the MLB draft simulator. It's open for business. Get your mock draft on. And of course, follow the Welsh on the Twitter machine at IsItTheWelsh, and me at Joe Pisapia17. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For the Welsh, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros.